Oh, sorry. Well, that's okay. So the Zoom owl just told you we're going to get started because it said the recording is in progress. So my name's Christine Muir. I'm only going to talk for half a second. I'm the director of the Drake Library. I've been here almost a year now, and I just am trying to put myself out there and meet as many people and introduce myself as much as possible. My role today is simply to facilitate and support, and I'm also running the Zoom room, and we are recording on Zoom, but the camera's focused on the authors, so no one in the audience will be captured on camera. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I want to thank all of you authors for joining us today. It's an honor for me because I've heard some of your names multiple times, and it's a thrill to meet you in person and learn more about your process and what you've written. And I also want to introduce my colleague, Laura, who is the head of technical services here. She is fantastic. She does all the cataloging work and processing work so that when you want to order a book or read a book, it's ready to go into your hands because of the work that Laura does. She's going to moderate today. That's my half a second. I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Thanks. Hi everyone, and thank you for coming today. I'm so appreciative of it. I just want to mention really quickly, we are going to use a microphone for the writers today. It's just something we're going to pass around. So just bear with us on that media front. So I'd like to get right into things and first thank our writers for coming today. It's so important to talk about work like this and see what we can all learn. And I want to give a brief intro of each writer. I'll start with Kathleen. Kathleen Ralls is an award-winning educator, sports coach, and Fulbright scholar. Her doctoral research focusing on gender equity, sports, and voice empowerment led her to create Kathleen Ralls LLC, a female empowerment and leadership training organization. Kathleen began her career as a sports writer before finding a passion for teaching and coaching. A lifelong learner, she has visited over 20 countries and conducted research on 4 continents. Kathleen is an avid athlete who has completed more marathons than pull-ups. Thank you, Kathleen. Marion. Paul Marion was born in Lowell in 1954 and moved with his family to Drake when he was 2 years old. He grew up in town, attending St. Teresa School and Drake High School, and lived in Drake through his college years and for a time after. While in college, he worked part-time at the M.G. Parker Library, one of the best jobs he has had, he says. After decades living and being involved in the Lowell community, he and his wife Rosemary moved to Amesbury, Mass. In 2018. He's the author of several collections of poetry, including Union River and Lockdown Letters and Other Poems. He edited the writings of young Jack Kerouac in the collection Atop and Underwood. His book, Mill Power, tells the story of the comeback of the historic factory city of Lowell. In addition to being a writer, he founded Loom Press in the late 1970s and now publishes about 6 books a year by writers from our region and beyond, both prose and poetry. Forthcoming books include interviews with people who were impacted by COVID in Lawrence and Lowell, and short story collections by Steve Connor of Lowell and David Daniel of Westford. Next year, Loom Press will publish the selected poems of Anne Fox Chandonnet, a Drake native now living in Missouri. Thank you, Paul. And Ron Kolek. Graduated from Northern Essex Community College with a degree in environmental science. After college, he went on to work for the McAllister Scientific Division of Raytheon. He eventually started his own company, designing and manufacturing environmental teaching aids for schools and colleges. One day, while working on a table saw, he cut off the fingers of his left hand. After a long operation, they were reattached, but he suffered a pulmonary embolism where he had a near-death experience. After this incident, he became curious about life after death and began to investigate its possibilities. He soon discovered that even with his scientific background, he could not explain some of the experiences he had. Thus, his career as a paranormal investigator was born. Ron is the author of Ghost Chronicles, More Ghost Chronicles, Ghost a Day, and has contributed to many other works. He is the host of the popular Ghost Chronicles Radio and has lectured across New England. Thank you, Ron.
in the same way. That's
Nice. Okay, so why don't we ask our first question, which is for everybody, and that is, what started you on the path of writer? Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. In high school, I went to Chelmsford High School.
Yep.
Okay, good. I went to Chelmsford High School and there was a teacher, Mrs. Marcotte, my senior year. I took her journalism class and I wrote an article about the softball team that I played on. And she said, you know, Kathleen, I really think you have, you know, a skill, a talent for this. And so when I went to UMass Amherst, I switched my major from English to journalism and kind of pursued that from there. So I started with a teacher, and I also have to give my mom some credit. She's a retired reading and writing teacher who, like, TV was outlawed in my house growing up, like sports and news, and that was it really. And we read and read and read. So all that reading led me to think about maybe I should just try my own hand at it.
It's great. Bob?
It's good. Yeah, I don't mind. You're good. And you can leave it there. It's okay.
Well, thanks everybody for inviting us, and thanks to folks for coming today. When I heard that my partner here was a sports writer, reminded me that my first writing experience was writing sports. As Laura said, I grew up in Drake, went to Drake. I played baseball at Drake High School, and the fall after I graduated, my former baseball coach, Tom Tobin, heard from the sports department at the Lowell Sun that they were looking for correspondents to cover some of the sort of B-level, C-level football games on Saturdays, high school games. And so Tom said, you ought to call Sam Weisberg, if you're interested, they'll set you up being a correspondent. And so I did, and it was like my first byline was on a football game between, I think, Drake and Bishop Curtin, Nashua High School. And at any rate, I had no thought of being a writer when I was growing up. For about a minute, I thought I might be, in a rock and roll band like the Beatles, but I don't have any musical ability. So that quickly was washed away. But I started in college at Merrimack College in North Andover, and there had freshman writing class, and there was a professor, Catherine Murphy, who took a liking to my writing and encouraged me, and made me think for the first time, oh, maybe there's a path, to be a writer. I took a short story course with her the next semester, and then thought I was going to be the next John Updike, writing short stories for the New Yorker magazine. That didn't work out, but I, kept writing, and that was really the first time that I had a sense that there might be a way to be like a writer in the world. I had been writing. Well, there were letters to the editor, but they were sort of long, so they're almost like op-ed pieces for the Lowell Sun. And I would get a big charge out of seeing, my name in print in the Lowell Sun. So, those were the sort of the early activities that got me going on the writing path.
Ron, how about you? How did you get started as a writer?
First, it amazes me that I'm a writer because I don't read. Although I have a vast collection of books, my mind is, it's very difficult for me to follow in a book unless I force myself to do it. Jan, my wife here, when our son was born, promised me that, made me promise that I would never read to my son. I'm also a radio host, and I absolutely mangle the English language. The words are so strange that they call them Ronisms, but they all get the point across. And despite all that, I almost had a major in English. It was like, it's credit shock for the major. But anyway, when I started doing the ghost project, I was either going to prove or disprove the existence of ghosts. And I soon realized that there were people that, even if a ghost came up and wanted to slap them across the face, they would still rationalize it away. And there are other people that need no information at all, just believe. So I decided rather than trying to disprove or prove, that I would just share my experiences. So ever since I started doing the ghost project, we've always been media friendly. We always did a lot of stuff with the press, a lot of stuff with TV show companies and so forth. And then eventually I began writing a monthly article for a newspaper. And Marion Wood, who was a psychic trance medium, was working with me at the time, and we decided, well, actually what it was is we did a romance writers conference where we went in and told people, what we did and stuff like that, and that's how it all rolled. We went into our book agent there, we signed with her very shortly after that. We were commissioned to write a book, and that's how it all started. So I was kind of like led into it. It's really like, I really didn't think I'd ever write a book, but the books are well written, thanks to my partner and myself. So that's how it is.
Great, thank you. Another question for you all, what work or author, or both, have deeply inspired or influenced your writing? Want me to give you a minute to think about it? Sure.
I think the people that I really started following were sports writers at first. That was my major at UMass, and I wrote for the Daily Collegian. There was a writer for Sports Illustrated named Gary Smith, and I think he still writes occasionally. He would write these amazing features, and I read about his job one time, and they said I remember before the Sydney Olympics, they sent him and his family to live in Sydney for like a year before the Olympics, just to gain knowledge of the culture and to really be embedded in what he was going to be writing about for the Olympics. So I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing to be able to do that. And he didn't write just the game stories. He wrote really about culture. He wrote about family, and those are the stories that always really interested me. And of course, we have our local, sports writers with Karen Garigian. She is someone that I've always looked up to and someone I've gotten a chance to talk with, who's a writer for the Boston Herald. So I think we always get a couple newspapers delivered in the house every day. And so those are really the early writers that I follow.
Hi, thanks. I have to think a little bit on this because it's kind of like there's two lanes. One is prose and one is poetry. I was a working writer and editor for a long time on the staff of UMass Lowell. I was in the communications office. I was essentially a reporter, editor, for the world of the university. So I wrote a lot of journalism, and the person who I've always admired, as a writer of nonfiction, journalism, reportage, is Joan Didion. Her two books of essays, Slouching Toward Bethlehem and The White Album, are very prominent, on my favorite bookcase in the house. So she was really important as a kind of model, not that I would say I could write up to her level, but I really learned a lot by reading her writing. On the other side, I came to poetry through modern, say modern, that's like 1920, modern American poetry, when things shifted away from, what you might call sort of the old-fashioned English, romantic poets and the kind of poets that, when I was in high school were still, the main poets that were taught in English classes. But I learned there was a whole other kind of vocabulary for poetry, with American poets starting, in the around 1920s, people like William Carlos Williams and Carl Sandburg, even kind of quirky E. Cummings. These were people who were writing a different kind of poetry, in my estimation, based on not a lot, because I didn't have a strong background in literature. So a lot of what, has been my experience is sort of self-taught, autodidact, which in a way might have been good because, it was all discovery. I was a political science major in college, took only one creative writing course. So, I was sort of unconventional in terms of the practice of writing. I was more, my sort of professional training was almost like a pre-law type path. I thought I was going to go to law school, but I didn't do that. I ended up, staying on the writing side, and luckily was able to get a job as a writer at the university.
Wonderful, thank you. What inspires you?
What authors inspire me?
Sure, or anything that inspires.
Well, through the radio show, I've interviewed many authors, like Linda Zimmerman, Roxy Square. They've all published probably a dozen books on various subjects. Leslie Bannatyne, who's written so many books on Halloween, Jody Pineapple. But the one who influenced me the most was Jeff Belanger, who's written probably close to 20 books on the paranormal. And I contributed to some of those, so he was the one who really got me involved, and it was the one who said, you can do it. You just have to apply yourself. Just they always told me in school.
Thank you. I would love to ask Kathleen if she would do a bit of a reading for us. So Kathleen, go ahead. Sure.
So my book is called Take Her Word for It, Sports Cultivate World-Class Leaders. Just a little bit of background. I had done some research in Ethiopia 3 years ago with girl runners. And I asked them the research question, do girls who participate in sport perceive greater voice empowerment as a result? It was a question that resonates with me because it comes from my own experiences in general, I'm pretty introverted and I'm quiet, but any confidence I feel like I've had to do things and pursue goals in my life really have come from being part of a team and being an athlete. And so when the pandemic, I had finished my research in Ethiopia, and when the pandemic hit, I thought, I kind of don't have a job. I love my teaching position. And what if I kind of pursued this same research question with adult females who have an athletic background? So I'm going to read you just a little bit. Yeah.
Or you can stand if
Oh,
it's
yeah,
working
you can stand
again.
if
Yeah.
Sure. Whatever you feel. How about that? That way it's a little less awkward here. I get antsy sitting too long. I feel like standing, you're the same as me, go ahead. And so this is gonna be from my chapter 9, it's called Speak Up. It's a little bit about myself, which you've gotten a little bit of preview of, and kind of why I'm pursuing this research question at all levels and all ages. So growing up in the 1980s, I was a huge Boston sports fan. There was no team above the Red Sox, but if the Celtics, Patriots, or Bruins were on television, I would watch. There were no women athletes to watch on television, except during the Olympics and when the Boston Marathon aired one day a year in April. I remember Joan Benoit Samuelson winning in 1983, 1 year before she garnered gold in the first ever Olympic women's marathon. I watched SportsCenter religiously in high school and in college. But eventually my dedication waned about the same time I pursued a sports journalist career. Excuse me. I wrote for the Daily Collegian at UMass and then landed an internship at the Sun in Lowell, Massachusetts. At both newspapers, I was surrounded by men and we highlighted male athletes. athletes. Sure, I had covered women athletes here and there. There was virtually no prestige in this. Like everybody else at the time, I fought to cover women's basketball and baseball. In college, I got those beats, but I did not find the satisfaction that I was seeking. I experienced uncomfortable situations in men's locker rooms, and my editors advised me to forget they happened. In one instance, a group of minor league baseball players chanted, "Drop your towel," to their teammate while I was interviewing him. An assistant coach missed an opportunity to infuse professionalism into his players when he decided to kick me out of the locker room. The other journalists protested and then walked out with me because they felt that if I could not get my story, they should not either. I had every right to be in that locker room, but my newspaper removed me from the beat instead of fighting the issue. But there were also cool experiences. One of my favorites was attending the inaugural media day for Women's United Soccer Association's Boston Breakers and writing about professional golf and tennis. However, I never really found a great scoop. Deep down, I realized I would never be comfortable digging into another person's life and then reporting on it. It is just not in my nature. As a journalist, I envied the coaches I interviewed because they were still part of a team, albeit contributing from a distinct perspective. I eventually put the dream of being a national sports writer away when I pursued a graduate teaching degree in the mid-2000s. To be honest, the break was really good for me. I began a new chapter as a high school history teacher and sports coach, which surpassed my expectations. As a side note, my mom being a teacher, I avoided that career path, and everyone's like, "You're just like your mom." And I'm like, no, I'm not, but I am. I enjoyed coaching more than teaching most days, even though coaching drained me emotionally. My teenage student athletes poured their hearts out, and it crushed me when we did not reach our goals. It was easy for me to connect with them on so many levels. Even though my love for the Red Sox was still there, my interest in sports had changed. I stopped feeling guilty or embarrassed because I didn't follow the NFL or the NHL. I stopped paying attention to college men's basketball. I stopped all of it. I started thinking more about who I wanted to be. I started thinking more about, who I wanted to be interested in. Who could I still be? Who would I want my young student athletes to have as role models? And who were my role models? I honestly cannot recall exactly when this shift changed, but now I know it has been coming for a long time. I nod as I write this because it feels so real. I began to watch women's sports that were on television. I liked tennis, World Cup soccer, track and field, and college basketball and college softball, which is just amazing if you need a little prodding. I paid more attention to the careers of professional women athletes. What did it take for them to get where they were? And how could their experiences and lessons be shared with others? In immersing myself in women's athletics from youth to college to professional, both nationally and internationally, I realized that I wasn't alone. So many other women were on a similar path, and I was playing catch up as alternative media outlets grew. 2 generations into Title IX, and women athletes are tired of watching only men's sports compete on primetime television. Most major media news outlets fail miserably at covering women's sports. Professional women athletes do the heavy lifting through social media. They tell us how their training is going, what they like to eat, why their sponsored products are amazing, and they inform us where we can catch them compete. It strikes me as odd that though I was once a sports journalist, now I only read a newspaper sports section if it features a picture of a woman. And most days, I do not end up reading the sports section, in case you were wondering. There is a belief that the level of interest in women's athletics is inherently less. Therefore, media outlets are more likely to promote men's teams because they believe that is where the money is. As Coach Abe and the NCAA gender equity investigation established in Chapter 2, that is not the case. If women athletes receive the same funding as men athletes, this would be a much different conversation. In talking with women in this book, I needed to ask what they would change about professional sports. I did not ask for solutions or step-by-step processes. I was simply curious to know more about what was on their minds. I learned feeling empowered to use your voice can be the start of something big.
So the next question that I have is for everybody. I've heard the term before in my travels, writer's hygiene, talking about process or format, whether or not you do outlines, what time of day you write, where you write, all that kind of stuff. And I'm wondering what your writer's hygiene is. You want to start with Paul?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
When I get asked a question about the writing process, I have a kind of routine answer, which is I'm always writing. And what I mean by that is, in my view, the first step or phase or first part of writing is paying attention. And so, in a way, a good writer is always paying attention, and it's preliminary to the actual, putting words on a screen or on paper. So I would offer that. I don't have one approach. Probably the most consistent process thing is that I've always worked in notebooks. I've found that to be really helpful, and it's allowed me to be more organized than I might have been if I didn't have that discipline of writing in a notebook. It's random in a way. I'm not talking about like diary type writing, but in a way I've trained myself to use the notebook as a way to save ideas or little bits of sentences or an idea, and that way, I'm not scrambling around looking for pieces of paper or envelopes or whatever. I don't have a daily, writing sort of schedule. It's more spontaneous, and then I have to qualify that saying, it's different with creative writing than with like expository writing or reporting, which requires a different kind of focus. In that case, if I were to be writing a long article, I might outline it, so that I have a structure that I at least begin with. I might get off it, but it's a way to start. So, but I'm not a fiction. I don't write novels, and I've gotten away from writing short stories. So, I can't say a lot about sort of writing prose in a creative way and what kind of a process that might involve. I have been trying to write a memoir. Everybody's writing a memoir, right? You look at the New York Times book review. But my life isn't like extravagant enough, so I'm not sure I can put together a story that someone would be interested in reading. I'm not a survivor of a plane crash, or I wasn't in a war, or I've fortunately had in some ways an uneventful life in terms of extreme experiences. So. But I also thought, well, that was a challenge. Could somebody who grew up in Drake in sort of conventional, semi-conventional fashion, can that be the source of a story about the American experience that, there would be readers for. I don't have an answer to that question yet, but I'm still working on it.
I do do a lot of journal writing, you're saying, so that I have a couple journals. One I write, I still compete, like, we wear red shirts and play field hockey. That's about as formal as we get every Tuesday night in Acton. And I do some running and I coach, so I'm still pretty active and involved with athletics. So I have a journal where I write kind of like the emotions that come out of sport, because that's kind of where I get a lot of like after the experience. I kind of think a lot about what it's meant to me, and brings up lots of memories. And then I have a journal just like what's happening in the day. And so I always kind of joke with my family, like, I'm the only one keeping a journal and you're all in trouble. Who advised this? But actually, that was really helpful for me. I started journal writing when I was heading into writing my dissertation. I'd never done anything of that length or in depth before. And I was thinking, kind of help me get my writing and just kind of like loosen up my thinking. And I remember like I was kind of self-editing in my journal, and my aunt, one day, she said, you know what, like, when you're dead, people are gonna read this, who cares? Some long lost, she's like, we'll all be gone, just write, don't self-edit. So I do a fair amount of journal writing just for myself, obviously. I don't go back and read it. I always think, oh, this will be really helpful, and I don't, go back. But I will say, when I had to write the dissertation, so I'm 44, so I kind of grew up like before a lot of kind of attention deficit things were diagnosed in school. So my husband is a very he was an outstanding student. I was a good student, but he was like a phenomenal student and like super focused. He's also a teacher and a coach at Lowell High. And so he would watch me do my schoolwork and he'd be like, I don't know how you get anything done because your like focus is all over the place. And I'm kind of quiet and I hide it really well, I guess. So when I had to write the dissertation, I came back from Ethiopia in July of 2019, and I didn't actually write the first words until January. I was going through the data and I was like, no, I gotta comb through the data. I gotta keep going and pull out this and pull out. No, I was just sitting there. Like I didn't know what to do. And then I visited a friend in Florida. I was gonna do a couple of conferences, and I got to stay in her condo for 10 days alone. She had to go away on a school trip. She works at a university. And I sat down at like 5 p.m. one night and I just started writing till like 3 a.m. every day. And I wrote 177-page first draft of this in like 10 days. So like once I locked down, like I can do it. But like for months I was like, oh, and my friends like, you could graduate in December. You could finish your work early. And no, I did not. But once I kind of lock in and do it, then I'm okay. So a lot of journal writing just to keep my hand in it and keep it kind of clears my emotions and clears, the things that fester in your mind to keep the thoughts going clear. So, and then once I write, but it's blah, 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 for a long time. Thank you. Process. What do you think?
Actually, I'm a lot like you. I need something to make me do it.
Yeah.
Basically, need pressure, which is why I've always signed with publishers, because you have a contract, you always get it done, so you've got that pressure on you. But the best thing I found is to set certain time you're gonna do it, and sit down and do it. I don't do journals or anything else. I just sit down and whatever I'm writing on. I do nonfiction, of course, so we write down our initial thoughts, because believe it or not, especially in nonfiction, my books are written by Marion and myself. And it's like you're actually there on investigation, you're in our heads, you're here, what we hear, and everything else, and the font actually changes between the two of us. So it's got to be accurate. And a lot of things that we thought were happened during these things, because we've done dozens and dozens of investigations, we're not sure, because the human witness is one of the worst pieces of evidence. Our mind actually, once it gets away from the initial events, that's enough. So we actually have video and audio and everything we went through, we have to review after we wrote that initial thing. So we sit down, write everything you want, make sure you get it down first, get your thoughts, get your flow. And then you rewrite, polish and clean it, make it really good. But it's difficult for me because I need pressure to get things done, always have. And so that's my advice, is set aside a time for it and you'll be surprised, once you start writing, it does flow pretty good. You know, you get into the thought, your brain starts thinking of what you're doing now, and you're set. So that's my process.
Great, thank you. What is one piece of advice about writing you wish you had before you started?
I'll start with you. Okay. Take a second to think about it. I know it's not just, doesn't necessarily come right away. I think the value of the first draft can suck, and it's okay. I think it would be the best advice, and I think you think of the great writers, your favorite writers, it must just be amazing when they sit down and write. And now I follow, other authors on social media that I really admire, and they talk about their editing, their relationships with their editors or people who read for them, and how critical and important that is. And I think just to get it out and write, and then go through the rest of it is really where the work I think begins. So cool, thank you.
Laura mentioned in the introduction that I edited the early young writings of Jack Kerouac, writing that he was doing from the time he was like 14 until he was 21. So really the beginning stage of him being a writer. And a couple of things come to mind, regarding sort of the advice. There was a documentary film about Kerouac made, after he died, of course, and one of his friends, poet Robert Creeley, said Kerouac was a writer. He wrote, and that's a simple thing to say, but another friend of his, the novelist, slightly strange guy, William Burroughs, who met Kerouac during the time that he was at Columbia University, just after. Burroughs said in an interview that when we met Jack, he had already written 1 million words, and he was 21. And I when I was editing his early work, one of the things that just astonished me was the amount of writing that he had done, before, he became somebody. And I think the lesson, if you want to call it the advice there, is, if you want to be a writer, you have to write. You can't just talk about being a writer. You can't think about, well, I'm going to do this one thing and then that's going to change my life. It's really, it's not that different from sports in a way that it requires commitment, discipline, practice, and for most people, you only get better at it, because you're practicing, by writing every day.
Just make sure I know. No, it's good, yeah.
What do you think about this advice?
Piece of advice. Be careful who you write with.
Okay.
If you're writing with someone, it's not always easy. Marion is very anal, where I am more loose. So it was difficult with that. She had to always do the typing, protection. So, but there are certain things. In fact, when we finished our second book, she told me she would never write with me again. However, we do our third book. So if you're going to write with someone, it has to be tolerable. But I have actually two, if you don't mind.
Okay.
The second advice is to, when you finish your work or are in the process of finishing it, and you have an editor, make sure it's someone who doesn't know the subject you're talking about. Because what comes natural to you, or what, okay, like an EMF, you might push, I don't know an EMF, you gotta, someone who has no idea what the heck you're talking about, unless, so you have to have, it's good to have someone outside of your field to edit it, because that way they can ask the questions that your readers would be asking. So that's my other piece.
Great, thank you. Ron, actually, I was gonna ask if you'd like to come up and tell us a story. All right.
Yeah, hurt my back. All my life I've gone through a lot of stuff. Played hockey, get it kicked out of me, but boy, I had back. That was worse. Anyways, as you notice, I'm not reading because I've explained it earlier. No one listens to me. But all our books, the Ghost Chronicles and more Ghost Chronicles especially, are actually cases that we investigated. So they're in the books, there's everything from us accompanying a Franciscan monk on an exorcism to a haunted pole dancing studio, to haunted lighthouses, times that a spirit jumped in our car and tried to take over Marion while we were driving on 28. So a lot of interesting, and the stories are sometimes humorous, sometimes serious. So I guess I'm going to talk about one that I enjoyed a lot, and of course that was I believe it's in the first book, and it was the Conquered Colonial Land. And Marion and I were doing a radio show there. She was my co-host at the time. And my wife, my lovely wife Janet, and I stayed at Haunted Room 24. And we broadcast the show there. And then we did a little investigation, and then Marion went home. But while she was before she went home, she went to the bathroom, and she was looking in the mirror. And she said, when I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman stand behind me. So I said, okay. So she came out and she said, Ron, don't be surprised if you have company tonight. And I kind of laughed and jumped in the bed and said, here I am, come and get me. That's the way I am. But anyways, it was uneventful. I set up cameras in the room while we slept. At that time, we were using the old VHS recording cameras, not this digital stuff. And sure enough, in the middle of the night, the bed started shaking and everything. It wasn't my wife, she was sleeping. But so I grabbed the EMF meter, the EMF meter went off. And I said, this is great because I got the cameras removed. So get evidence in the morning. So anyways, that was it for the night. But Maureen, on the other hand, went home. And usually when she goes home, she does this little cleansing thing, I guess you would say, protection. Yeah, she'll wash herself and shower. I always take a shower, no matter what time of the night it is when I finish the investigation. It's not only just for ghost hunting, but it's also for the world in general. There's so much negativity out there. It just kind of cleanses you. So it's a good thing for me to do, I believe. Anyways, so Marion went home. She was kind of tired. She really didn't do much protection. She went right to bed and slept like a log. So the next morning, she's at the kitchen table, and her husband comes out. He comes and says, you, if you do your ghost hunting, you're sleeping in another room. She says, what are you talking about? She says, well, last night you came home, you went to bed. I'm laying in bed with you. The next thing I feel, you rubbing my back and giving me little kisses. So I got excited. I crawled on top of you. And then all of a sudden, the light from the blind, just the crank of light came in. It lit up your face. But it wasn't there, it was just a skull. And she looked next to it, and Marion was sitting like a log. And then this thing just disappeared. So that's my little story.
Amazing. Thank you, Ron.
Yeah. Oh, one thing I do want to mention.
Yeah.
Before I do. Whether you believe this stuff or not, okay, one thing I've always been is honest, and whatever I report is what I believe I saw, witnessed, or have been told variously. So it's whatever's in there is the honest truth according to me.
Thank you. Okay, so let me see, where am I at here? I want to make sure I don't ask the same thing twice. At this point, I'd love Paul to come up and do some reading, but before you start your reading, I'd love to ask about the process of publishing and what advice you might give or steps that people should take if they're interested in the publishing.
I can answer it.
Sure.
Well, publishing is a complicated undertaking. If you're a person who imagines writing a book, or if you've written a book and you want to, or written a manuscript, and you want to get that manuscript made into a book that is then available on the market, it's in some ways it's much simpler with the new technology. I mean, everybody has the capacity to be a publisher now. When I was coming up in the 1970s, publishing was in some ways a very controlled industry, and there were X number of they call them trade presses, the big publishers in New York, Random House, Simon & Schuster, those people. And then there were university presses, and then there was this other layer of independent small presses. But the technology was still pretty much the same, for getting a book in print. I mean, you needed to go to somebody with a printing press, and the printers were contracted out to the publishers. But if you were an individual, you could go, to the printer in your town and say, I've got this manuscript material, I'd like it to be made into a book, and you could pay somebody to typeset it and get it designed, and then you would then give it to the printer. You could have a book, but you would have a very challenging time in distributing it. Now, skip ahead, 40 years, and there's an explosion, a kind of revolution in self-publishing, and there's not the stigma that there was, back in the days when, publishing was controlled by a certain number of sort of established businesses who were the gatekeepers. And if you couldn't get past the gatekeepers, you weren't going to have a book published. Now, there are all kinds of resources online. There are print-on-demand companies, Amazon. I'm not sure if it's still open, but Amazon had a feature where you could get a book produced by Amazon, and then anybody's book can go on Amazon. You don't have to be Simon & Schuster. And when you go online on your laptop, your book looks on Amazon looks like the same as Stephen King's book. So it's a much more open process now, and I would encourage anybody to think about publishing their own book to get started. There was an article in the New York Times last week. The biggest selling author in the country is a woman, I can't think of her name, but she started out self-publishing, and now she's selling in the millions. She writes these sort of very steamy romance novels.
Colleen Hoover, I think it's.
Yeah, right. I mean, she's just killing it, you know, and so, you know, the old rules in a way don't apply. You know, there's still, you know, the sort of the overhang of, you know, the establishment press, that, you know, are trying to sort of still be the judges and jury for what people should read, but the horse has left the barn, you know, I mean, if you know, the tech billionaires, you know, can write their own software and publish it themselves, then, you know, why shouldn't a person who's written a novel or a nonfiction book, you know, not have the same kind of liberty to do that, and now the technology allows it. The challenge also, I mean, always remains, you know, getting your book to market. Now, if you're you know, a real demon social media person, you can do a lot of damage, you know, and get a lot of people, you know, paying attention to your book. Also, you know, if you're somebody who's a, you know, gregarious person who, you know, as often as you can, will go out, talk about the book, get yourself invited to libraries like this, and let people know about your book. So, you know, in a way, it's limited by your own energy. But it's, you know, it's still, the book industry is kind of in flux right now. You know, it's like a disruption period because the old time publishers, you know, still haven't quite come to grips with the sort of the internet revolutionaries. So I think, you know, if you're thinking that way, or you know somebody who's thinking that way, you know, be optimistic about, you know, trying to get your book in print and in front of people, and just get started. So read something?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
okay, so I wasn't sure what I was gonna read today, but let me see if I can find this. After Murray wrote my paranormal, not paranormal friend, but my friend interested in paranormal life. I'm
paranormal.
I'm a UFO guy. You know, so when I was growing up in Drake, in the mid-60s, there was a kind of burst of UFO fascination, and I got caught up in it. And this is the year that we graduated from high school. This is called Ducharme's Porch, and this is a prose sketch. This book, Union River, a lot of stuff about Drake in it, but a lot, you know, stuff about very many other things. But it's poems, but and I say sketches, so they're short prose pieces as well. So this is one of the short prose pieces. Ducharme's Porch. 1966 was the UFO summer in New Boston Village and Crosby Heights, the former being the lowland in my growing up neighborhood, and the latter, the wooded incline, being rapidly cleared for houses. Mr. and Mrs. Ducharme on Cinderella Circle sat on their back porch every summer night with binoculars and a solar system map, watching for odd lights in the sky. Cinderella had been a frog breeding swamp, Gendro's Pond, filled in during the suburban land rush. Green leapers, languid in the heat, stretched their leopard dark thighs behind them. Huge blue sewing needles strafed us near algal water rife with hornpout and muskrats. The two adults made an observation post and unnerved us on our Stingray bikes, cruising the loop of new two-level homes in the long twilight after supper, and obsessively checking in with the lookouts when the porch lights clicked on. One street over, unpaved, we poured sand on flaming signal pots and stepped into the whale-mouthed bucket of a parked front-end loader. A name flew to us, a sing-song plea. Elaine, someone's anxious mother calling in the dark. The radio bled through the Ducharme's kitchen window screen with a revved up talk show host and callers rehashing the latest news about the self-reported abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. The story had broken in a fast-selling book that was excerpted in the large format Look magazine. A couple claimed to have been taken aboard a spaceship by lizard-eyed extraterrestrials wearing cadet caps who interrupted their homeward drive south of the White Mountains in New Hampshire, a road I had traveled with my family. Under hypnosis, the Hills described medical type examinations both had been subjected to, and they recreated a map that suggested that the aliens may have zoomed to Earth from a star system 37 light years away, Zeta Reticuli. All this was gasoline to fire up 12-year-old brains already fueled with pop culture space lore on television, from spooky series like The Outer Limits and phantasmic features hosted by the light bulb-headed creature character Feep, to the jokey adventures of the cartoon Jetsons and Space Family Robinson on Lost in Space. The more knowing science fiction of Star Trek premiered in September that year. The Ducharmes and their older children jumped up and went to the railing facing south each time one of the parents called out about a streaking light over the cemetery a half-mile away. What's that? It's moving. They always swore they saw an orange blip inside the white dot. I'll read one more piece here. I live in Amesbury now. I drove in up 113 and passed through John Oganowski Square, which is always kind of sobering. After 9/11, I wrote, about John Oganowski. I didn't know him. His cousin Marjorie was in my high school class, but I think everybody, certainly everybody in Drake and around here was, shaken by the reality of what happened and the fact that, he got caught, in the middle of that horrific event. So this is another, it's a prose sketch also. On a rise on the south bank, just below the rocky grill of the riverbed, the Merrimack River, students at his college carved into stone his name and those of 6 others from the school to remember John, who grew up to be a pilot and a farmer, who shared his land with Asian refugees who had resettled in the inner precincts of Lowell and who wanted to grow vegetables as they did in Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos, a region from which John had flown home hurt soldiers in the closing years of the Vietnam War. John, the preservationist, who saved open space in Dracut, which was called Aguntakuk by Native people for its vast forests. John, who on September 11, 2001, lifted his passengers into a severe clear sky, nothing but blue on the route west. John, who guided American Airlines Flight 11 out of Boston's Logan Airport, where so many of us have flown away with faith in the promise of technology, management, and civilized behavior. John, who carried his travelers into boundless air on a day when he had, as usual, driven in early from Marsh Hill to captain his plane across country. That day, like any other in the late summer, not officially fall, even though schools were in session. That day, like no other, by the end of the morning, by the end of the paper rain and ash cloud, by the end of the twisted steel, and burnt ground by the end of John's life. On that day from which we have not fully recovered the bounce that has always made people elsewhere admire our sure belief that Americans can figure out a problem and invent the next dazzle. A day that moved John's neighbors and even strangers to drive slowly up the winding hill that leads to his farm, where they heaped flowers, handmade signs, candles, sympathy cards in front of the wide white gate leading to the farm. Piled high, the cut flowers placed in silence, and past the white gate up the driveway, a giant crane held an American flag that looked as big as the flag that covers the left field wall at Fenway Park on opening day. And past the crane and flag was the farmhouse of John's family, his wife and daughters, who needed him to come back so he would sit next to them at the table in the house one more time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we get to questions, I just wanted to ask one last questions of the audience. I just wanted to ask one last question of our writers to kind of sum things up. At this moment in your career, what are you most proud of?
So rough. But I do want to mention on publishing. Self-publishing is a great way to go, but for someone like me, I'm not sure about you, but I need, once again, structure. So by signing with a publishing company, it's good. A lot of people think that because you write a book, you're also going to get rich. Well, it doesn't really work that way unless you're really, really, really good author. Which is another good thing about going through a publisher. You can get an advance, and advance is not the money they give you, it's money you're going to earn on your books in the future. So you get that big check, which is great. So another incentive to write. And you don't have to wait for little increments to come in. I mean, once you pay back your advance, then you do get those. But going to a publisher is good. I have 3 different publishers, including Simons and Schuster. But it's also another way to look at it. And there are small publishers too. You can go through still vertical adjacent and get your book put through a publisher who also distributes it for you as well. So, okay, what was my question?
What are you most proud of?
Oh, the books. I did it. Good.
Can I ask, do you have an agent?
I have, well, first 2 books I have an agent. I was acting as my own agent on 3rd book.
That's another piece of the.
Yes, as I mentioned before, that when originally we gave a presentation at a romance writers conference, and there were a lot of agents there and so forth, and one of them came up to us and wanted us to sign us.
What are you most proud of? I think well, I always joke, 'cause I'm in the middle of 3 kids. I'm the shortest kid and the only redhead and the only lefty. So I like to hold it over my brother and sister's head all the time, like, oh, you know, just a little family joke. So but we can say that my mother, she's, I guess I found out a few years ago, she sends my brother and sister like a lot of like pep talk notes and like voicemails. And I was like, wait a minute, like, what? I didn't get those. My dad has passed away, so it's just us with our mom. But my mom, like years ago, she gave me a gift card to Barnes & Noble, and she said on the little thing, she wrote, "Reading has opened up the world to you." And that's the kind of the closest I've gotten to like a pep talk. My mom, she reads and edits everything I write, by the way. So my mom's super close and she's wonderful, but it's our joke. And so I think the ability to be able to write about the stories of girls and women around the world. You know, I love to travel and to learn and to kind of bring what I learned back home and not speak for the girls and women that I get to meet, but maybe to share their stories in a way that is kind of appropriate and comfortable. So the part about being able to write about what I'm truly interested in is really exciting. So it's just something that I want to, I have all these trips and things that I want to do. I keep dropping these ideas to my husband. He's like, whatever, sometimes he gets to go on these trips and sometimes he has to stay home and pay the bills. So, but I think just being able to learn more about girls and women and the impact of their voices in sport and education is really my passion in life, and being able to do that as a writer is just awesome. So.
Did I already answered?
Is it you're most proud of?
Oh, what am I supposed to?
Yes.
Yeah, what are you most proud of?
Well, I would also say, getting some books published, I mean, having books in a library,
Right.
getting what you have written on the record. And, it's a very satisfying feeling. I mean, book writing and book publishing, is mysterious, to most people. I mean, there are a lot of people who are readers, but, relatively, fewer people who are public writers. And so, there is something satisfying, in getting the work in a book that's published, whether it's by Simon & Schuster or whether it's by, a small press, but also, there's a sense, and this goes back to the writing process. If you get a book finished and published, you can put that experience aside. If you find yourself with, 2, 3, 4, 5 books that you've written and you haven't been able to publish them, it can be a drag on your attitude, as far as sticking with it. So, if you can get a book published, it really lets you move on, to new work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to say thank you to all three of you. At this point, I'd love to open it up to any questions that we have from anybody in our audience.
I have
Christine.
3. So I'll give everybody a chance to think of your own questions. My first question is for Kathleen. Did I see recently something about you and Lowell Reads? And if yes, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so my book, right.
The mic helps the Zoom audience hear a little bit better and the recording.
Oh, I
So
don't
that's,
mind, I just
thank you.
No, it's no problem. Yes, my book was selected for the Lowell Reads for this year. So there's a, yeah.
That's what I thought, right?
That's great. Yeah.
So we had our panel last week with there are 11 women that are featured in this book, and there are 3 that are local, 1 from Lowell, and 2 from Chelmsford. So those 3 women were able to join me in the panel last week. So we got to talk about, they're actually my youth soccer coach, my high school field hockey coach, and then a cousin who is a coach and a runner and a Hall of Fame coach and athlete through Lowell High. So I got to thank them actually more beyond being part of my book, but really for influencing me in different points in my life. Just to have the opportunity to formally do that was exciting. And this youth soccer coach is someone named Deb Fleming. All the girls that she had coached for like 20 years, from when we were like 9 years old to, into high school, they all, whether they came to the event or they were on Zoom to thank her. And so she was in tears because she was like, she didn't know that she was in the book. I hadn't actually interviewed her, but I had talked about my experience and what a positive role model she had been for all of us. And we didn't really even realize it at the time. We just thought she was great and we won and whatever, orange slices for everyone. But it was nice to be able to see her feel some gratitude, from so many people. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Are there more events planned, or is the whole community reading the book, or do they all read it before the panel?
They already read it before the panel.
Okay.
So yeah, so they're working, there's some conjunction with the Women's Leadership Conference at UMass Lowell as well. So
Okay,
this might be one of the featured books coming up next year. We'll see.
that's very exciting.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Or just think it and we'll see what they give their answers.
Well, you've all dealt with publishers and agents and editors. I don't know which of those three tells you to make changes in your work, in your manuscript, and you find it infuriating when they try to change things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay.
Well, the most high level experience I had, with editor was when I was the editor of the early writings of Jack Kerouac, but then I had an editor at Viking Penguin Press in New York City. And, I was in dialogue with this, editor, Paul Slovak, is his name. And, he was sort of relating to me in the book, the level of the content, not the mechanics of it. That was like the proofreader, copy editor was like over there, but Paul was like working with me on kind of the shape of the whole book. I mean, it ended up at Viking Penguins quest. We cut out like 25% of the book to make it a more manageable size, which I was okay with. I obviously would have liked to have everything in, but my experience was that it was very respectful, collegial, helpful to me. To have someone who wasn't obsessively involved with the work, take a look at it, from kind of a mile high view and say, well, there's a few things in here that sort of repeat, those themes are already covered, maybe, we don't need to go back there. And so just helping to, make the book flow better and be a better reader experience.
Any thoughts on editing? You good? Yeah. What you said. Okay, sure.
Nobody likes it because, it's your work and you're like, I like that, but I remember the first book we were working on, I love music. And so I had all these lyrics and, we felt like, whatever, but I had, all these lyrics from different songs and of course they cut them all out because of copyright problems. So all of that, so that kind of hurt. But editors are really your friends. They're going to give you better products. So as annoying as they can be, they're well worth it.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions? Tyler.
Hi, this question's kind of general for everyone. So let's say there's someone, they finished their first manuscript ever, they have their manuscript in their hands, and they're ready to go see if it can get published or take the next steps. What would you say to that person? It's kind of a general.
Has anyone else read it?
Let's say yes.
Let's
But maybe
say
it's not like an official editor, but like a family member who looked over or a friend who was like, yeah, I'll edit it. Like someone who's never published before, it's their very first manuscript.
Right, which it's not a problem. I mean, everybody has a first manuscript.
Yeah.
If you don't have a first manuscript, you're not going to have anybody else.
Right, so there's been a lot of talk about the self-publishing, the Amazon, the big publishers. And I feel like it's a lot more daunting than just saying, go forward. So what would you say to that person who's never taken a step forward to this?
You can't be afraid. That's what I would say is you have to decide which way you want to go. If you want to try for a publisher, then you can submit your manuscript. There are some ones, smaller publishers to start with, might be a good idea. There are a lot of the smaller ones that will take a bigger chance on you than the larger ones. You can always self-publish once again, this Paul said too, that's nothing. But I would, you know, you can't be in a step where, okay, I'm afraid to do it. You have to do it. You know, you put this blood, sweat, and tears into this manuscript. Now's the time to get it published. And that's the whole goal of what you were doing. So you have to push it. You can't be working on it, just gotta go out there and do it. So you can do it, self-publish it. You can always publish it. Remember that. You can go self-publish, you can always publish it. So you want to try another route first, you want to try a publishing company. There are smaller ones that will certainly accept. If you go into one of those, make sure you find the proper one, because you know it has to be a product that they're dealing with already. You know, like there's some companies that deal with a lot of women folks and stuff like that. Not to this one.
Yeah.
And there are other ones that deal with paranormal. So those are the ones, whatever your topics are, that's what you want to try with first. And I would try a small publishing company just to see what, you know, they'll either say no or what it is, but at least you get a feeling right off the bat.
What would you say?
So this hypothetical manuscript or real manuscript, is it fiction? Is it nonfiction?
Let's say it's fiction.
Okay, let's say it's fiction. Is it a novel? Is it a collection of short stories?
That's a novel.
Okay.
Your normal fiction novel.
Yeah, so, you know, the first question here, did anybody else read it? That's really important, you know, to have a kind of third party consuming the story that is written. Another step to consider, and it can be done with a novel because chapters, would be to think about trying to get, in this case, some chapters published in literary magazines, so that you begin to establish some credibility. You know, if you're a person who's written a novel and I'm just going to assume, you know, hasn't published previously, then it could be very helpful, particularly if you're going to go to a small or a you know, university press or you know, a larger press, you know, to show that there are other editors who have kind of signed off on the value of this writing. You know, so if you're writing a proposal, you know, to a small, medium, or large publisher, to be able to say, well, you know, this story, you know, I've had 3 chapters published in, you know, Plowshares magazine, Massachusetts Review, you know, whatever, something else. It shows the editor reading that proposal. Okay, you know, this work, you know, has, you know, passed through, you know, the sort of editorial judgment of other writers, and that's helpful. The other important exercise that you would want to do for yourself is write a short marketing strategy for the book that would be a way of convincing a publisher of why they should, excuse me, publish this book. You know, what are some comparable books that, you know, this novel, you know, might be thought of in the same company, you know, and, you know, that, you know, say like it was a novel about sports, you know, can you compare it to, you know, 3 or 4 other, you know, contemporary sports novels, you know, that have had some success? And also, who do you imagine as the market, you know, the readership, for this book? Is a kind of book that might find its way into the kind of the world of book clubs? That would be a way of, boosting the visibility of the book. I mean, is it related to any, is there a news hook, that, it might be, a reason for somebody to take a second look at the story. So that's a very useful exercise to do, is think about, how the book would be marketed, once you got it in print.
Just wanted to add too, that my book is actually self-published. And I went through a year-long program to write the book. So if someone were per se interested, it's called Book Creator. And you are in a cohort with a group of people from all over the world who are writing most likely their first book as well. And so they line you up with a series of editors that you meet with weekly. You have like kind of deadlines, goals, and even if you've already written the manuscript, you can jump in right there and start to work with editors, and they actually walk you through the publishing process and how to market and use social media. So that was really wonderful for me, because I kind of had this idea, and I felt like I had just written the dissertation and published that in these boring academic journal articles, and I was like, I don't know if I can I was sending out pieces of my dissertation to get published in academic journals, and I was like, I don't know if I can take this rejection and crazy editing, and we hate this and process again. So that actually was really great for me. It's called New Degree Press. I'm sure there are other programs out there, but a UMass Lowell business professor told me about the program because she needed a textbook, an updated textbook, and so she decided to write it herself, so she could have exactly what she wanted with her students. And she said, Kathleen, if you're really serious, this program is really inexpensive, and it's first class in terms of getting the process done the way you want it to look. So.
What was the name of the program?
Book Creator. It's New Degree Press.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Anybody else with any questions?
Over in the corner
Oh,
again, I figured. Well, two things. Well, couple of tidbits. Lisa Genova also published Still Alice herself initially, and then it was picked up by a publisher as it grew in popularity. It just kind of spread word of mouth. So you may know that she's actually quite successful as an author now, but her first one was self-published. Chris Bojalian, who has written many, many books, his latest is The Lioness. He was first published in Cosmopolitan magazine in the 1980s, and that's how he got some attention to himself, and he's also very successful now. So to reinforce the points that you've all made about self-publishing and outlets, two more success stories that way. My last question, which might be a good way to wrap up unless people come up with more, is what's next for each of you? Are you still writing? Do you have something in the works? Are you taking a little break? What's next? What can we be looking for from you?
I do have actually 2 books I'm working on. But once again, I've got to do something. Push me on it. I started both of them, but yeah, I will have 2 books. One is called Grave Intentions, which deals with cemeteries and cemetery stones, legends, stories, a whole variety of things. But you have a task, so it's all things to do with cemeteries. That I am working on. That's the closest. If you're interested in be much more those chronicles. Those chronicles will much more. I don't know, but maybe if they're on that series too.
Excellent.
I am working on a book. In 2020, I collected data from 150 Chelmsford High female athlete graduates. There are no statistics. They've just been kind of lost in terms of athletics at Chelmsford High School. So I just decided I created a survey using Google, and I just started to send it out through social media, through different, there's been coaches and administrators that have been at that high school for 30, 40 years. And so 150 women completed the survey, and so I'm about 85% done with that one. It's actually my mom is reading it again, of course. She keeps her busy, so she loves it. So yesterday I stopped over it. She prints everything out and edits everything with pencil, then we meet and we talk about it. So a little bonding time. It is nice. So yesterday I stopped by just to say hi, and she was like, "I'm almost done tomorrow," and I'm like, "Mom, it's really okay, you know." So that's what I'm working on next. There'll be another self-publish. And we want to celebrate what girls and women have achieved, Johnson graduates, because they ask the questions, not only like what did they do as athletes while they were in high school, but also how sport has impacted their professional lives. And so many of the women talked really eloquently about how they feel like their confidence and success is rooted back to their past experiences that they've had. So I don't have a title yet, but that's what I've got working on. So early 2023 is the goal.
Awesome.
Well, I have the unfinished memoir of an ordinary guy growing up in Drake who was not kidnapped or attacked by wolves.
It sounds stellar, but I think you need a title too.
I need some
That's the
conflict.
title.
I need some tension in that thing. So, I did not see a UFO, but, that would have been like, kind of a special thing to be in there too. Pretty much the next year, sort of like looking ahead, I'm going to be busy with about 7 books from Loom Press. We've got the book of interviews, people who were affected by COVID, in different sort of roles, students and community workers and so forth. From Lawrence and Lowell, that's going to come out in December. 2 books of short stories, one by Stephen O'Connor from Lowell and Dave Daniel of Westford, who, there's a case, Dave Daniel published at the highest level in New York, won prizes for his crime fiction, but he's 74 years old now and kind of like not the next new thing in New York. So he seems happy to have Loom Press publish his next book of stories, which is called Beach Town, and it's a connected set of short fiction about him growing up in Weymouth, Massachusetts. Also publishing in the spring a memoir, I guess, first book, this guy who never wrote a book before, wrote 100,000 words. It's about being a young teenager in the Little Canada neighborhood of Lowell, in the final stage of Little Canada before the cranes and the wrecking balls and the bulldozers came and knocked down the whole French Canadian neighborhood. But the story is told kind of remarkably in the voice of this 13, 14-year-old, and he never breaks character. The voice is a kind of combination of Huckleberry Finn and Holden Caulfield, from Catcher in the Rye. And it's just an amazing thing. Like he never wrote a book before. So he's, I know him, I was desperately trying not to publish it because I thought he should try to find somebody, who could actually do more for him. Loom Press, we do the best we can, but, we're not a big publisher. But, he wanted to publish it with us. And, so we went into the editorial process and cut 25,000 words, which has made it, I think, a more, kind of compelling story. A mistake that first-time writers often make is they want to tell you everything. They want everything in there and and he thankfully was not protective, in a crazy way. you know, saying you can't take that out, you can't take, you know, he was very cooperative, and I think he saw, you know, that the book got stronger, you know, by being shorter. So, you know, that's another, one of the books we have coming out. So I'm gonna be busy with the editorial stuff. I'm not writing as much new stuff, you know, but, you know, I've been at it since 1974, so.
Thank you. So I want to thank everybody for coming out today. Our authors will stick around for a little while. They have some books for sale and can sign things. So thank you so much for coming today. Have a great day.
Thank you all very much, and thank you Alice, for coming. The Zoom voice is going to yell at you again. I'm going to stop the recording.
Oh.